That was so those Fame Junkies is my second book, and I didn't it was like the whole start of this thing was just totally half baked, to be honest. I had no idea what I was doing. Basically, what it came down to was my first book came out, and I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do now? And I was just like, okay, why don't I sell the second book? So I had this idea. Fame Junkie started off with this idea of I sold it as this book called Afterlives, and I was going to go and look at people who had briefly been really famous, like kind of almost accidentally famous, like Baby Jessica down the well, or that kind of stuff, and um, and look at what happened to them later. I read to Harper Lee. I mean, there's like I read people who are kind of iconically famous for a period of time, and how you kind of, which was kind of interesting to me. But that kind of didn't quite work out. And then I kind of was like just grasped. I'd sold the book. I can say this now. My father was reminding me, I actually called my dad up and asked him at one point, would you be able to loan me the money so I could repay the advance and get out of this book contract? That's where I was with this. That's not a great place to be. But I eventually kind of found my footing, and I found my footing because I got tied into um, this kind of talent search network where they have these talent schools where you go to them and you pay money, and then you go to these talent conventions for kids. And then you get spotted at the talent convention, and then you move out to LA, and then they live in this complex where all the other child actors live. And so I basically followed that. It took me a long time to kind of get to that. But when I did, then there was a narrative. So I started off in Buffalo, my hometown, at this small talent agency. And then I go to the giant convention out in LA. And I found this great agent who represented kids, who was just kind of like, he kind of just, he was just absurd, but he also was insightful. And I followed him. And then I spent time in this gated community where all the child actors live. And then there was a narrative. But it took me almost a year of flailing before I found that. The first part was about people who want to become famous. The second part is about the industry, that like Us Weekly and all the, and then the third part I think is about fans. I think probably it was because I was finding interesting stories in these different sectors, and I wasn't exactly sure how I was going to tie it all together. And so some sort of organizational thing like that felt like it was kind of addressing three facets of fame. I mean, the truth is, as a storyteller, the easiest kind of story to tell is a story where there's one through line, because you're not giving the reader a chance to put the book down. So I'm actually happy to hear you say that you like that structure, because there's always a certain amount of trepidation of anytime you stop and start a new section that you're going to lose people. But I think it was probably that I was finding interesting stories in all three of those things, and I wanted to find a way to include them all. It was a dark world, this world. I mean, I think that's the first thing, is that people look at it and they think, it's the kind of Us Weekly. It looks very kind of desirable and kind of glamorous and fun, but it's actually it's not an especially nice world. And it's um I mean, there was I remember at one point I was at that, I described that journey, right? The kids go through the talent school and the talent convention, and they end up living in this gated community. And at the gated community, they went to a school that was like specifically a little tiny school just set up for child actors. And I went to the school and spent some time talking to the kids at the school. And I talked to some of the younger kids, and I asked them to describe how they envisioned Hollywood before they got there, and what they thought of it after they'd gotten there. And the way they described this place before they got there was this kind of like magical land of like just great beauty and kind of happiness, a kind of Valhalla of sorts. And then they just described the kind of I mean, I can totally get it. And then they described the reality of it. And I felt like somehow seeing that through the kids' eyes was super clarifying. The other story that stands out in my mind is I was with this agent, this child actor agent. And he was seeing all these kids, right? There's like, I don't know, like 2,000 kids at this convention. And he was looking for his one child star, right? So I was like, what are you looking for? I'll know it when I see it. And on the second day or third day of the convention, he was like, I found him. I found the kid. I said, really? Tell me. And he said, well, we were up in my room and I was doing an audition with this kid. He was like 11 or 12 years old. And a fire alarm went in the building. And everyone started vacating the building. And the kid didn't stop his audition, didn't stop talking. And he said, because the kid knew he was the most important person in the room. The kid knew his value. That's what I'm looking for. And then when I went and met the kid was like, the dad was like the celebrity personal assistant. The kid was like the opposite of, like I say in the book, it was the opposite of like the stage dad where the dad is just pushing him for everything. It was the kid being like, no, dad, you're over there. I'm doing this. And it was the agent saying, this is what I want, because this is what it takes to kind of get through everything, that all the rejection and all the death. Like, you need some sort of super alpha male, not a prima donna who constantly needs to be reassured, but like a super kind of alpha male. That was like, that was kind of like this moment that was both like horrifying and also kind of enlightening to me, that this is what it would take. I don't know. So that just like, that always stood out to me as like a moment. And then there was also some side pieces that I did that didn't make it into the book. Like I went to the Major League Baseball. Major League Baseball has a whole training session where they train young players to handle the rigors of fame, which I thought was really interesting and smart. Exactly to your point about how do you prepare someone from unraveling. And MLB was the first to kind of realize, we have an investment here. It's important to us to kind of not have these guys dissemble. So I remember that. That being one of the N.P.R pieces that I did. And that was a pretty interesting one. I mean, I will say that I burnt out on that subject matter by the end. I mean, one thing I learned from that book is, whatever book you write about, be prepared to spend 2.5 years of your life in there and be certain you want to be in that chamber. So I have this series called Deep Cover. It's a podcast series about people that live double lives. And each season is almost kind of like a book. It's a story told episodically over 8 to 10 episodes. So I've done 3 seasons of it. And I am currently looking around for, I'm pursuing my idea for the 4th season. And you know, there really are like, they're very much like books, so it's just done in the audio realm. There's no nonfiction book that I'm working on right now. The nonfiction energy has been greatly channeled into the podcast. I once had an N.P.R producer tell me that the key to good radio, and I think it's true for good podcasts, is when you feel like you're kind of eavesdropping on an intimate conversation between 2 people. And I think that that's what I really like about it, is that there's an intimacy about it. And it's funny, and this is not a knock on books, but I feel like the listeners that I hear back from that listen to the podcast, there's a kind of, they feel like they are close to me and the subjects in a way that I think that it's much harder to achieve with a book, because it's just like, you know, it's close, it's in your ears. It's I think in some ways it's more intimate than television, even, because television, you're kind of watching it and you're kind of, but there's something about like when it's just in your ears and you're just sitting on your couch, you're driving, you're doing the dishes, there's a closeness to it. And I think you're not even, yeah. So I've enjoyed all that. And right now, I'm not motivated to go back and do another nonfiction book. That may change. I'm sure I'll burn out with the podcast eventually, but it's been a good run.